Right. Let's get started. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. In this talk, we're going to cover the Open Data Protocol, or OData. My name is Pablo Castro. I'm an architect on the group at Microsoft that works on our data stories, including the Open Data Protocol. I hope you had a chance to check out the keynote earlier this morning, where Doug covered the opportunity we all have with OData. Always a challenge to follow Doug. He has some serious energy going, so we'll see how we keep up to expectation. The goal of this talk is to cover what is this OData thing, and sort of walk by example into the different scenarios that hopefully will drive home why most of us in this room will probably care about this and will be able to tap on opportunities that will come from the Open Data Protocol. I'm going to use a lot of examples, so you see concrete examples of how to actually use this, and you'll be able to use this today. So many of the things I'll be doing on the screen, you can follow along on your browsers or on your Visual Studio installs. Some of it will come soon. If things that come soon, I'll just point out on the spot. If you buy all these so far, later today we'll have a second session at 3 p.m. where Mike will cover how to actually build a data service that is an OData server. And he'll drill into the details of how you put one of these together and push it out to the web. So the way I'm going to approach this is I didn't want to be too philosophical about the topic. I wanted to be as pragmatic as possible. So what I'll do is I'll scan this by example, and I'll sort of walk through the history of how this thing came up to be. And I'm going to start at actually MIX 2007. In that year, here at MIX, we actually talked about this thing for the first time. And back then, we were calling it Project Astoria. And probably many of you were in that MIX and may remember that. It's interesting to see how our thinking evolved over time since that point till now. Our main focus at that point is we were thinking about data and how it interacts, what is the interaction model in modern web applications. And I used this slide to articulate the problem, or the challenge. Traditional web apps are everything goes together into the client. More modern web apps, when you look at things like Ajax applications, RIA applications, or even mashups, things that are not a single app but multiple pieces working together, what happens is data is separate from presentation and behavior information that goes to the client. Either because of interaction paths are different, like in an Ajax app, they're coming from the same source perhaps, but they come through at different times and through different interactions. In the case of mashups, and more in general in data services, and I'll talk about that later, what happens is data comes from a different place altogether. And that place may or may not have its own front end. Maybe it's pure data, and then mashups are what actually brings that data to life on a client experience. So when we were going through this, we set out to set what were the requirements for a successful web service interface that was appropriate for exposing data and having a rich experience on top of a data set. And some of these, in retrospective, are quite obvious. But we were young and naive, and we were trying to figure out what was the right thing to do. So first of all, it was this guiding principle of do not invent stuff as much as you can. The web is tricky when you sort of cook up things that are not natural, don't fit the environment well. So the best thing you can do is go with infrastructure that is already there. So whenever we exchange data, we do it over HTTP. We use as much of the HTTP features as possible, from the sort of different methods to the caching infrastructure to concurrency control and all that, so that we don't look like a weird thing sort of tunneled through the web. We expose the data in a way that is natural for the web environment. So all of your infrastructures, proxies, servers, and authentication schemes, and so on, will just work. The other thing, which we started down this path, and I think it has actually paid off quite well, is the idea of uniform patterns. There is, if you think about sharing data on the web, you can say, well, I'll just put some JSON or some XML file in a server, and people can access it. The problem is when you think about sharing data at large, multiple clients and multiple servers all over the web, then there's the challenge of how do you actually understand the data that the other guy is putting out there? So having a uniform interface that helps you be able to make assumptions about how the structure of the data is going to be, what questions you can ask, and what is the shape and organization of the overall data set is actually very important. The other one, which I kept because I wanted to keep the original slide, but our thinking over that evolved a little bit, is we focused on data much more than on formats. And I think it's still true today that the system is very much format independent. We do content type negotiation, standard HTTP stuff, and we let clients choose the right format. Back then, we were more on the lines of, well, formats don't quite matter. Turns out that they do matter, and there is long discussions on what is the right thing and the wrong thing and why. The reality, and I think the higher order bit here, is to design systems that have this data independence aspect, where how you actually represent data on a particular instance has nothing to do with the abstract sort of concept of data that you have at hand. And you need to be ready to be flexible and adapt your concrete representations to the different scenarios and clients. And finally, and this one I'm really lucky we had this, I'm really happy we had this perspective, is be very hardcore about separating what is the proper web data service interface from the store. You don't want concepts of the storage layer to leak through the interface, because then you're sort of tied to a storage model. And as we're going to see today through this session, we have OData feeds on top of all sorts of data repositories, from databases to flat files to unexpected things. So the thing is, if you need to define a service interface that is simple enough so you can put any backend store in it, but also abstracted out enough that the details of any particular stall don't come through, so you get good data independence. So with that in mind, we shipped an experimental version. People liked it. So we turned it into a product, and it's part of the .NET framework now. The other thing that happened is, as the product evolved from ADO.NET data services, as a matter of policy, we don't do cool names. So we killed Project Astoria, and we did the very compliant ADO.NET data services branding. So we did data services, and what happened there is the protocol underlying this idea took a life of its own. So we thought it would be good to give the protocol its own identity and then have the data services implementation be our .NET implementation for it. So we called the protocol the Open Data Protocol, or OData for short. If I had to summarize OData in one slide, and I'm skipping a lot of detail, and I'll give you pointers to where to find out and show some examples now. But the key elements that characterize this thing are all around uniformity. Uniformity is what enables a whole variety of clients and servers inside your company or across the web to share data effectively and simply without having a lot of friction in your tools, in your runtimes, and your visualization experiences. So first of all, we have a uniform way of representing structured data. And we have a couple of representations. We have an atom-based representation and a JSON-based, and I'll drill into that in a second. We also introduced a set of uniform URL conventions. As trying to be a good web citizen, these systems are very hyperlinked driven. So if you are a hypermedia client, you can just follow links along and navigate all the sort of the graph that forms the data set. Now, there's times where you do want to ask specific questions about a collection. You want to narrow down the number of entries, or you want to sort it and maybe page over it. And so we came up with just a set of conventions, nothing fancy, that allows you to make certain assumptions about the URLs if you want to, and then sort of query the server with that. And finally, you want the interface itself to be uniform, the service interface. So what that means is we have a set of operations that everybody agrees on what they mean. So whenever you say get, everybody knows get is a retrieval operation. Everybody knows it's idempotent. Everybody knows what is the caching policies for it, given headers and such. Same thing for the other ones. This allows intermediaries like caching schemes to work, and in general, it's the kind of thing that actually makes the web a successful system. Of course, whenever you talk about an operation, like get something or put something, you need to say, what are you talking about? And for that, we have an addressability scheme based on URLs. Like, again, nothing invented here. What we do is, just like any web page and in every site has an address that lets you talk about that page, tell your browser to go to it, or give it to a friend over email, we do the same thing for data. So every item in an OData system has a URL that you can use to talk about that item. It's the URL you use to perform operations on that guy, and it's also the URL you can actually take and give to someone, to another system or some other person, to go and take a look at the same data item you're looking on your computer screen. So before I get too far into this, and in order to sort of not get too abstract, let me actually play around with OData a little bit. And I'm going to start by just playing around with it with the browser and some tools. And then what I'll do later is I'll start to bring more and more concrete developer experiences on how you can do this. So one of the cool things that happened since 2007 is, in 2007, the only Astoria services back then that we had, well, our own services. Nobody was using it. We were just announcing it. So now I can actually go and use real services on the web. I don't have to carry my own or go ask people for data sets and stuff, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to start with MIX itself. If you go to api.visitmix.com, there is a page that describes the MIX API. Turns out that the MIX API is, of course, an OData feed. So I'm going to go navigate, and I expect people to, end users are not going to go here. But if I go to the root of the service, what I get is a service document. It's an atom concept, and it's a very handy way of describing all of the links that take you to each one of the collections in a particular OData server. And each one of these guys are URLs. They're just relative to this base here. So when I say /sessions here, what I get is an atom feed. And just to illustrate this, if I go back and enable my feed viewer, let me do this real quick there, and I hit the site again, you'll see that the browser actually sees this as an atom feed, and it'll render it nicely and all that. It's just that if you look under covers, in addition to the nice feed information that lets you sort of display this on the screen, we also have structured data encoded in a way that computers can safely parse with full fidelity and then work with that information. It also has a lot of links. So we capture all the relationships between the data items as URLs that link to each other. So sessions are linked to speakers, and speakers are linked to the other sessions they do, and you can sort of start walking through the data set. Just like I can go play around with MIX, I can do the same thing with Netflix. And if you were in the keynote, you probably saw this already. Whoops, I did something wrong. It's about right there. Oh, that was scary. So, man. There. So, OK, same thing, except this time is Netflix data. And the thing is, this pokeability, the ability to go pick around on a service, even though this is not designed to be used like this, it's actually very important. This is how you can figure out what's out there, what you can use. We have simple things here. I talked about the URLs and the simple conventions there. I can ask questions to, in this case, to Netflix. Like, for example, I can say, filter, really, or actually, let's do rating equals PG, just to stay on the safe side. There's a bunch of people in the room. And then I'll do release year, and let's say 1980 here. And I can also sort stuff in addition to order stuff. So here, if I say order by, I can, for example, say average rating, descending. And I get the list of movies from the 80 that were PG, and they're sorted by rating. So I see Star Wars is at the top of that, which is kind of not surprising. So I can ask interesting questions to the system. And this is just data that is available out there on the web. The other thing is, just like I can ask this here, I'm getting an atom feedback. I was talking about in the different representations. I'm going to switch to Fiddler. Fiddler is an HTTP debugging tool, and it's available for download everywhere. And if I hit the site with Fiddler, I get a 400. I have a bunch of spaces. Let's just do this for now. And let's just say top 10. Which is another nice feature. You can just get a small subset. And if I do raw here and I show you the result, this is the same XML you were looking at before. What I can do is I can do standard HTTP content type negotiation. Here I'm going to say accept application/JSON. And I execute the same request again and look at the response. Conceptually, this is the same information, except that now instead of angle bracket, I get the JSON curly braces stuff. So very, very simple stuff, but it allows you to sort of ask for the right representation depending on the target environment. And of course, regarding the uniform interface, I'm just doing gets to get stuff. Later on, I'll talk about put and post and delete to actually change the state of a service. So there is one thing that then we did on top of this that actually I think it was quite instrumental to make this thing useful. The protocol is a protocol, and you can debate forever whether it's the perfectly right thing or not, and there is a matter of opinions. Some things are easier to figure out if it is the right thing. Some things are a matter of style. The higher order bit is that you can actually achieve all these scenarios. And then on top, the question is, can you make it so that there is as little friction as possible for developers building these things and for end users using data that comes from an open data protocol endpoint? And in retrospective, I think this was one of the contributions to the space that made this thing really viable. We put a lot of time making sure we had great developer experiences. Let me show you 2 examples of this. First one is, I'm going to sort of take it from where these guys left it in the keynote, where let's say we want to build this simple web page. I have a prepared thing here just with a bunch of scripts and styles. And the simplest thing I may want to do is I just want to pull data from somewhere and render it on the screen. So we were just playing, and so you don't have to watch me type. I have a few snippets here. So the simplest thing here is I want to get a data set and render it on the screen. Let me walk you through this code. So this is using the jQuery getJSON code that actually, if you support JSON with padding, you can actually do this across domains in a safe, in a safe way, because this is just a get. So I'm hitting the visit MIX API, and I'm hitting the session information. And since I can't do headers across domain, we have an option to use $format equals JSON in the URL. It's not as good as the content type negotiation for a number of reasons, but there's scenarios that don't work without it, and we try to be pragmatic about these things. And then this function gets called when the data comes back. And what I'm doing here is I'm using what we just announced, our joint effort to put a templating engine in jQuery. So you can see this very, very nice one-liner that says, OK, render this. Here's the template. The data comes from data.result, which is an array of the information that comes back. And this guy is saying, render that in out, which is this guy here. So let's run this. It's not going to be the fanciest thing, but if we wait a second, we get the list of sessions. So very, very simple stuff that enables you to build new experiences with data that is available out there. So let me come back here and point out an interesting thing that happens once you start playing with this a little bit more. Let's say that instead of the mix thing, I wanted to use Netflix. And so I can simply come here, and sure, I can say odata.netflix.com/catalog. /catalog titles. And if I do that regular here, I think that should do it. Let's see if it works. So boom, I went from one thing to the other very, very easily. So now I switched from talking to the Mix site to talking to the Netflix site. Now, I asked a series of questions before to the system. I said, I want the movies from a release year of such and such and of this rating. The thing is, you can only build so many permutations if you have fixed entry points into your server. And the thing is, for something like Netflix, whenever you make a decision about fixing an endpoint, any one of those decisions will probably take away from that service. Because how do you know what people are going to build? Usually you expose this information to encourage folks out there to be creative and build different things with your data sets. So the last thing you want to do is constrain the options for interaction with that endpoint. So I have an example of this where, let's say that actually in one case, I don't want a particular year. I want to have like a range where I can sort of go up and down and have a window of years, and I want to see things there. Let's build that real quick. So I have another snippet here. Let me paste it and walk you through it. So what I'm trying to do in this one is I'm going to say catalog titles And I'm building a small query that says the release year is between this value and this value. So I'm doing kind of a range query. So because I want to inspect movies within a time frame. And so let's throw in some jQuery log here. We'll put a range of years. And I'm going to use a slider. It's part of jQuery UI. That it's just like a user interface aid. And I'm going to do this in the callback. There. So I'm creating a slider in one of the divs, setting up some of the parameters of the slider. And then whenever the slide position changes, I'm calling the getJSON function and pull that piece of information from the server. And I messed something up. Let's see. Let's do a joint debugging session. 28, I missed some. Oh. Maybe it's that. Or maybe not. Let's see. We'll give it a second, and then I'll quickly give up and come back to it later. In slider. It does look good. Anyway, I'll come back to it in a second. But the point I was trying to make is, like, you don't want to get in the way of people asking additional questions against your data set. So the more flexible your data interface, within the practical limits of what your backend can take, is actually much better from the perspective of opportunities of people building on top of your system. And I'm really hating that this doesn't work, but yeah, this closes here, doesn't it? Yeah, it does close. Oh well, we'll come back to this later. It was all cool and all. So let me show you a different thing now. We built a bunch of stuff in JavaScript, and also we made sure that the server formats, like the JSON encoding and so on, were like a good fit for use in JavaScript. Of course, at the same time, we built Silverlight experiences, and we wanted the Silverlight experience to be really, really good. So we taught Visual Studio a bunch of tricks about OData, like the one Doug showed in the keynote, where you can add service reference to something. And then we built a library that you can use in clients. Now, the cool thing is then, when the whole phone thing came along, it turns out that the phones are based on Silverlight, Windows Phone 7. So now we can transport all of that work that we did already in Visual Studio, and it works on the phone. So if you want to build an application on the phone, it's actually pretty straightforward. So let me build one of those. And let's hope we have better luck this time. So I'm going to add a new project to the solution, and I'm going to build a list application. We're going to go sort of low-key on this one. And so what I want to do is just get some data from this Netflix server. So I get a default setup for a phone application, and as you've probably seen, this is based on Silverlight. So I get a SAML file for the UI, and then a code behind where I can write some code. And so we have a data services client that runs on that, and it can speak the OData protocol. We have one detail missing in the current version of the phone tools, which is the add service reference dialog doesn't quite work, but I can make it work in another project and then copy it over. So let me come here real quick. Once this thing finishes loading up there. So I can come to any other project for that matter, and I'm going to say add service reference. And I'm sure I have the Netflix URL here. So I'll point at Netflix. And what I'll do is, when I hit go, what happens under the covers is, in addition to this structured data we've seen, there is a special entry point on the server that provides metadata about the system. And this entry point is optional. So more sophisticated services have it. Simpler services don't have it. Man, let's do it one more time. Interesting. Let's go check it out in the browser. Make sure there's something out there. Wow. Is like the whole web down, or it's just me? Let's try this guy. OK. One more shot.
It's getting a lot of hits.
Yeah, I don't know. OK. Let's do something interesting and change the demo on the fly. I'm not going to go for it without a bold move. So I'm adding a service reference to the MIX website. And I can see that I get metadata coming down, I get a service reference name. So I'll just hit OK on this. What we do is we look at the metadata document, download the information, and then we can generate types for you. And we can also give you an experience in Visual Studio where you can get strongly typed objects, you can get queries, and I'm going to show them in a second. And you can even visualize what is behind that service. Like if I do a viewing diagram, Doug was showing it against the Netflix service. I'm doing the exact same thing now against the MIX website. So, and this is like just based on some angle brackets going on the web. So the thing is, very low barrier of entry, just a few documents exchanged around, and we can give this very nice high-level experience. So let's keep going, see if we can somehow succeed in building this application. So what I'll do here is, among other things, we generate this file, and this was supposed to go into that project, so I'm going to copy it, and I'll add it to my phone project. So I'm going to go here, another new file, and let's just say class, and this is the MIX API. Paste this here, and I'm going to remove this weird namespace. OK, so we need to do two things now. We need to write a little bit of code to actually query the service, and then fix up our UI to actually display what we're looking for. So let's decide what to display by actually looking at the diagram. So we can query, for example, speakers or session. Like, how about, we can try speakers. We're getting creative here. We'll see how it goes. So we're going to go find all the speakers. So we have a speaker name that looks like a good candidate for us as a string. We have a bio, and we have a small image URL. Let's see if we can use those. So I'm going to go here and say, delete that. Let's actually make some space here. And then, so all I want to do in the list, and this is actually pretty cool. Like, a lot of the applications in the phone are just lists. And if you just want to build a quick list-based application, if you use this template, you just fix up the XAML a little bit, and you're ready to go. So in this case, what I'll do is I'm going to remove this border thingy from here. And then we said that we would use the speaker name. So let's say speaker name here. Hello, there. And here, we're going to say bio to see a little bit of the bio. So the other thing is, we saw there was some URL to the picture, so I'm going to say image source equals binding. And it was small. I already forgot. Let's take a look again. I'm glad I have the diagram. So it is a small image. So let's do a small image. And I think we're done. We can maybe change the actually, I forgot to close this. We're about done now. We can change this maybe to surprise demo. Thank you. I don't know what I would do without you guys. OK. Hopefully that'll do. So now we need to write some code. Let's go back here. I'm going to go to the code behind for the main page. And the project is already set up with a very nice separation of concerns. It has the view model on one hand and the presentation and the actual view on the other one. I'm going to break the separation of concerns for now. But don't break it. So let me go here and say using this was like service reference one. I have this thing now called events entities. These are all the entities in the event. I'm going to call this service equals new event entities. Let's point this URL at, we said this was api.visitmix.com/odata.svc. And now that we have this, we can go here and properly break all the separation of concerns that we had by saying we'll create a collection, data service collection. And actually, to do this, we need a reference to the data services client. Let's add this real quick. Now we should be able to find this guy somewhere. Perfect. And we said we would do speakers, so I'm going to say speaker there. And I'm going to say data context is my collection. And now I have to actually choose what information I want. So what I can do here is I can actually write a link query, for example, from s in service.speakers. And you can see we code generated all the entry points. I can ask questions like where s dot, and maybe there is image or sessions or a speaker ID or a last name. So I can sort of manipulate the exact data set I want. I can also like sort, say, by speaker, sort by first name, select S. We can also we can do filter, sorting, we can do paging, and so on. And we don't need this guy anymore. So the last thing we need to do is actually kick off the actual execution of the request. So I'll say load async. What this does is takes a query, runs it in the background without blocking the UI, and then when it's ready, populates the collection and notifies the UI of it. So, I don't think more things can go wrong, so I think it's fair to assume this is going to work. So it deploys the thing, surprise, wait a little bit, and boom, we have a list of speakers on the phone. Thank you. And actually, some of the pictures are coming down, so you can get pictures. So check this out. This is actually seriously cool. So I'm going to launch the debugger here, and hit a breakpoint. It's thinking. So let's give it a second to start. There. OK, I hit the breakpoint. So first of all, like, how cool is the debugging thing for the phone? It's just you're right at home. So I'm going to just step over this, and I'm going to hover over that query. Can you see that? So there's no magic under the covers. And this is, all these only to convey this one idea, that we can actually be effective at building great experiences on top of an open protocol. So here, you get objects, and you get link, and you get all of these sort of very nice experience, very much like the ones you have in other contexts. And under the covers, all we're doing is we have a link to URL translator. We're doing atom payloads in and out. So there is nothing sort of like magic or surprising under the covers. And if I hit a 5, of course, this will just execute the request and bring the list back up into the UI, or not, because I set up a random breakpoint here. OK, there. All right. So that took some real time adjusting. OK, so this part actually went well. We were quite happy with how the things went. And the tools actually took off and helped a lot of people out there build great services without having to worry about the tools. Then we started to talk to a different crowd. We talked with these folks that build actual business applications. And some of them are fronted by a web app, and some of them are not. The higher the bit is that they have very valuable data they manage in the middle tier. And these guys used kind of a different vocabulary. They say things like information worker that we had to get used to. But once you get the idea, this is actually quite an inflection point on how you think about data services. So, and I'm going to use SharePoint as a reference example for this. But you can imagine your own application replaced here whenever I say SharePoint. SharePoint needed two things: a flexible interface with as low of a barrier of entry as possible, and a developer story that was, first, present across all platforms. The more the better for accessing SharePoint. But also, it had a great Visual Studio story. So what we did is we actually enabled SharePoint to use OData. So every SharePoint site, once you have the OData plugin deployed on the server, is an OData server out of the box. So what you can do with that is actually use SharePoint as I was just using a second ago any of these other services. Let me show you an example. So what I have here is SharePoint 2010, one of the RC builds or beta builds. And I have a couple of lists. I have projects and employees are assigned to projects and so on. What I can do is, let's open a new window with this. What I can do is go behind this site. I'm going to go VTI bin and then the magic list data.svc. And when I hit that, I get a service document. This is just like the service document we got out of Netflix a second ago, or MIX. And what I can do now is drill into this. For example, we just had a list of employees, and I have all of my employees here. And if I look inside, the same structured data is present there. So all of the data in SharePoint now can be manipulated by tools directly as structured data with full fidelity. And this is not just an interface over the repository that is underneath SharePoint. This goes through the SharePoint business logic. So authentication, validation rules, requirements, workflows, everything that is in SharePoint actually runs. So you can think of this as an OData head on top of the SharePoint business logic layer, not on top of the store. In fact, it's pretty far from the store. So with this, SharePoint has an easy way of reaching anybody with an HTTP stack. And of course, if you're in Visual Studio, we have a top-notch experience for you. And let me actually very quickly walk you through this. Let's close the phone thing. So let me delete this service reference I created before in my, this is a simple WPF app, which is similar to the Silverlight experience and, of course, similar to the phone experience. And I'm going to add a service reference, except this time I'm going to add a service reference to my SharePoint URL. When I hit go, we'll do the metadata exchange just like before. And in fact, we figured out the right URL for the entry point. And you can see that now what was SharePoint lists became collections for OData. So I'm going to hit OK here. And now that I have a reference, and of course, by the way, and this is seriously cool as well, all the visualization services work, because it's the same thing. We don't even know it's SharePoint. So the same things I could do with Netflix across the web, I can do with a SharePoint site inside my corporate network. And here I can see that this is actually a non-trivial schema that I can go navigate, figure out relationships, and so on. So if I come back here now, I can add a using for my service reference. And I can do something very similar to what I did a second ago, where I'll create a context object. And this is the exact same pattern. And that's sort of one of the key elements, is like I don't need to introduce anything new. Same libraries, same Visual Studio environment. It's just that this time I'm hitting SharePoint. And the one consideration I need to have is the other side was a free-for-all, open, unauthenticated thing. And it was read-only. This one is, I mean, I put in some business information there. I don't want people to come party on my data. So this is, has authentication in it. In this case, my site is configured with integrated authentication. So I'm going to say credentials equals network credential dot, actually it's credential cache dot default credentials. And now I can write link queries to go tease out some of the subsets. Just like before, I'm literally writing a link query against my SharePoint site. And eventually, once I'm done, I can take my, my grid, which I don't remember the name of it. Let's open the UI so we can see it. So I have this very simple UI, and what I want to do is bind this to the grid. Oh, it was already well set up. So I can say this.data context equals, in this case, I can do synchronous in addition to async. So I'm going to do like projects here. And if I simply do that and hit F5 to run this app, I run a random application that is not what I wanted. Actually, the other one is running too. Let's give it a second, see if it runs the one I wanted. Let's let it think for a second. Come on. No, too early. The thing is, I close this, and it really, really wants to run it from here. Let's violently close it, see what it thinks about it. Oh, it insists. Very reliable. So let's let it start up, and then I'll kill it and show it to you. The thing is, you can build these very simple experiences also against corporate data, like in this case SharePoint. And not only you can read data like I've been doing so far, but you can also update stuff. If you're using .NET libraries, it's a piece of cake. You just change your objects. But the thing is, the other requirement from SharePoint was this needs to have a very low barrier of entry. So one of the things you can do, and I always use this as a kind of an example. I don't expect people to actually do this in their real lives. But in this case, I have a list of projects. And let's say I want to create a new project here. I could use .NET and create a new project object, add it, and it would be sort of all nice and easy. Well, here's the app, by the way. It took a while, but it eventually came back. Good thing about this, though, is this is SharePoint data. And there's nothing SharePoint specific in Visual Studio I needed to learn in order to do this. So let's do a quick update here. So what I'll do is I'll create a new project here, and I'm going to use curl. Curl is a command line HTTP tool, so it's as low level as it gets. So I'm going to say I want to do NTLM for authentication, use my current user, and the content type I'm going to use for this request is application JSON, and the data I want to send has, let's go see it here, we have title and description. So I'm going to say title, MIX demo, description, work or will run out of time. And finally, I need to say where to post this. And if we go back here, we have our projects collection. So I'm going to post it there. So if I just submit this, I didn't ask for the results to be JSON, so they are XML by default. I could have. And if I come back to SharePoint, I hit F5, we have a new entry here that is the Netflix demo. Thanks. Thanks. So also, you can see that the system knows it was me that created it. Business logic ran. If there was some constraints to be applied, it would have been applied. It would have failed if I wasn't authorized or the fields were not in good place. So not only every SharePoint site is now a point to get data from, but it's a place to put data in using the OData protocol. So let me give you one more information worker thing that we learned. So there is a question about, OK, you have data everywhere. Now, how do you derive great insight out of that data? How do you give you the tools so that sort of the things in the middle between the data and what you're trying to achieve sort of go away? This was the goal that the folks in the business intelligence group at Microsoft, at SQL Server had. They wanted to do this thing called self-service business intelligence, where people are empowered to go find new data sources and creative ways of putting them together. The question is, where's the data coming from? Yes, a lot of it is in databases, but it's not practical to assume that everybody will have straight connectivity to a database open and go partying on SQL on the thing. I mean, sometimes it works because it may be important for your job, but it's not an assumption that scales to the whole spectrum of scenarios. So we did two key things to make this go. First is we took Power Pivot, which is our business intelligence tool for Exchange. Sorry, for Exchange, for Excel. And enabled it to consume all data feeds from anywhere. The second thing we did is, turns out that a lot of the data goes to SharePoint, but a really, really lot of data, well digested and prepared for consumption, is in reports. So we made every report in reporting services to be an OData feed. So if you run the new version of reporting services in 2008 R2, you're already running reports, even on the reports you already had, and they're all OData enabled. So let me show you an example of this. So what I have here is AdventureWorks. And what I did is, this is a report. And I didn't change it at all. I just took the AdventureWorks database, the AdventureWorks report examples, and deployed them on the box. So this could have been your own reports. You can see a little icon here that is the OData icon. So now let's work with this in Excel. First, I'm going to go to my SharePoint site. And remember that we had this magic entry point. I'm going to grab this and go to Excel, open the Power Pivot environment, and say I want to get data from a data feed, and paste that URL. So Power Pivot and Excel just go to the website and figure out that they pull the service document. Remember, just a list of links. This could have been a static file out there. And now I get the list of all the SharePoint lists. Now they are data sets for me to consume. And I'm not in a developer role here. I'm in an information worker role. Like, I don't want to write code. I want to get insight from the data. So I can get, say, like employees or projects or whatever. And when I click Finish, this thing imports all the data into Power Pivot. And since this is plain HTTP, this can be running out of my box right here or across the web or inside your company. It doesn't really matter. So well, now that I have the data here, I can create a pivot table. I can process it, cut across it, and all that. Same thing with reporting services. This is actually a really cool example for a report because people do insane things to get data out of reports. I was very surprised when I learned the details. Screen scraping is a common thing. It's like, because the thing is, reports are something people put time on, and they are the version of information that the business uses, rather than the database one that is the sort of raw data. The thing is, even screen scraping doesn't help you with this one unless you want to screen scrape the charts, and good luck with that. So when you do OData over this, I'm going to click this button. And what this does is serves an Atom standard service document. If I open the service document, this actually brings me back into Power Pivot. It asks me whether I want to start over or use the one I have. If I use the one I have, I can see that I actually get the data underneath each one of the charts and the data in the actual table that I had there as raw data that I can actually import into my Power Pivot environment and then sort of go mash it up and sort of derive some insight from it. The other cool thing about this is once you have multiple data sources into Excel, and you succeed dismissing there the dialogue, you can start to do things like you can create relationships between these distinct data sets, maybe some coming from your corporate network and some coming from across the web from you. And you can put them together, set up relationships, and now sort of explore and literally creating an ad hoc client-side mashup using business intelligence tools without any help from a custom piece of code or any developers involved in the process. So all of your application data. For SharePoint, again, as I said before, replace SharePoint in your mind with your own application. You can use OData on the server to let all of these guys hit your data directly, not at the database where you don't want them because it sort of may bypass your business logic, but it sort of straight into your business logic, get the data, and then do this kind of very data-centric experiences on top of it. OK, so we talked about data and modern web applications. We talked about data and business apps and how to share data so that information workers can take advantage of it. I want to close with talking about data sharing at large. And by this, what I mean is there is this strong trend that has been cooking for a while, but now it's taking serious momentum about data on the web and the opportunity it brings for everybody playing in that space. And when I say on the web, it doesn't mean necessarily free and open for everybody. It ranges from data that is public, should be public, and is being made public right now, like government information and scientific information, all the way to social information. And there is all these sites, Nerd Dinner, Scott Hanselman's thing, is a perfect example of this, to commercial information that it may be public. Like in the case of Netflix, for example, it's actually interesting for them because you can build new experiences that then bring people back into Netflix. So it's actually good for the business to share this information. To, of course, premium data. And we talked in the keynote today about Dallas and how Dallas can enable you to monetize that piece of information that is valuable that you have at hand. And there's a number of challenges around making this work. And I'll touch on one of them and then drill into concrete examples. One of them is consistency and sort of currency of data. Like, none of these things, like government is a perfect example. You don't want to do this one-time effort where you collect a bunch of data, put it in some file or something, and say, OK, done, published. You want to have a plan, a process to keep that information up to date. And that probably means using technologies that enables you to have live data sets that you can maintain up to date, and you can also query, subset, explore in ways that are actually useful for client applications to build different experiences with them. Data sets do tend to go large, especially once you have a data set out there and the data set grows over time. It's not a bounded set. And people start taking dependencies on them. You can't just take it away from the other applications. Usually, what you do is you just keep growing, which means you need a strategy for partitioning and a strategy for hosting in a way that has sort of flexible provisioning schemes and so on, so you can actually keep up with the demand. And the more successful you are, it's a good problem to have, but you do have to keep up with how these things go. And you can see some of the examples of this in how we're sharing government information. And for that, I'm going to use as an example, let me go here. There is an initiative called the Open Government Data Initiative. There is some Microsoft guys started, and it actually helps people share government information. It's a whole toolkit. And people are actually using it. So let me go to a real place. This is a city called Edmonton in Canada, that they have this thing called the Open Data Catalog. This is like the city government puts all of their information for people to go access. And so if I go down here, I can see that there is various data sets. And let's go take a quick peek at one of them, like say bus stops. And if I look at what happens here is I have an experience where you can see the data right here, but I also get the URLs. So I can go play around with the stuff. And if I go navigate one of these URLs, what is there? It's a service document. And if you go drill inside, this thing inside has each one of the collections for each one of the data sets. Now, when you drill into one of the collections, let's do bus stops. And it's a large data set, so I just want a few. Let's drill inside. You'll see that a lot of these things have partition keys. This is stored in Azure, in Windows Azure. And the partition keys all over the place ensure that you can have very large data sets. And each one of the data sets has some partitioning scheme that allows you to sort of spread the data across a very large number of nodes. And of course, by the way, like once you have something like this, you can literally come to Power Pivot and say, give me data from that government site out there, and boom, you have the data right there in Excel. And the exact same thing works in Visual Studio. I can literally add service reference to the city of Edmonton and get my drawings and write link queries and the whole thing. And it's all happening because this data is being exposed out there. So if you think about something like a government data sharing initiative, like or GDI, or a scientific data sharing project, you want to focus all of your energies on the quality of the data that you're exposing. And everybody has limited resources. So if you had to pick something to go nail, is the quality and currency of the data. And you don't want to waste time building libraries and browser applications and all those things. You want those things for just to come from the environment, from the developer community. This is exactly the kind of thing you get when you use OData. Like these guys in the city of Edmonton, already got, or for that matter, Netflix or whatever, already have an information worker solution, and they already have Visual Studio support in it. And it was important for them to go cross-plat because you cannot make assumptions about any particular environment. So just like we have toolkits for .NET and JavaScript, we have toolkits for Java and for Objective-C and of course PHP. So you can go pick the right one for your environment and go apply it. Let me show you a quick example of this. I'm short of time, so I'm not going to write the code, but let me just show you the thing running. So I have this other server here. That is running PHP 5, and I literally have the homepage of the PHP toolkit for AD.NET Data Services. This is the thing that actually we're rebranding with OData. And one of the things I have here, there's a bunch of examples you can use. Among the examples, there is a little browser application where you can, in this case, I already preloaded the URL to the same Edmonton service we were using a second ago. And I can say here something like bus stops top 10, submit that query, and this is sort of my PHP code on the server. Is go and renders this thing on the screen. So if you look at what the code looks like, I'm not going to show the actual browser, but let's show the simplest example. You can see that we follow a lot of the patterns you saw before. You can execute a query and pass a URL with a link. We'll give you natural PHP objects. You can go pick on the properties and so on. So similar experiences actually go beyond the .NET framework into all of these other technologies so that you can derive a lot of value of having the data exposed using OData. All right. So, and finally, of course, if your data is free, so be it. But if your data is valuable and you want to make money out of it, then we have the infrastructure to do that as well through Dallas. Dallas lets you upload and manage and put a price on your data, and then have other people go purchase the valuable data you put together and expose it out there. And of course, every Dallas data set is actually exposed using OData, which means Excel works, Visual Studio works, like all the stuff you saw so far for open data works inside your company as well, and inside the Dallas service, which is the marketplace, literally, for data. So all of the things you had before, they still apply now. So last thought on advertising availability. Many of these sites, you don't have a way of telling whether or not they are OData enabled. And it would be really cool as browsers that are OData enabled emerge to have a hint in the page, just like we have web pages saying that you have an RSS feed behind something. You have a page. You want to have the page saying, this is the data that backs the information you're looking at in a way that a computer can process. And Scott actually has this going in nerddinner.com. Most of you probably know this application. So what I want to do here is, first, you can check out, he went overboard and actually put an icon right next to RSS icon that is the OData icon, so you can go browse the feed. But also, if I go view source, and let's make this a little bit bigger, you can see that there is a link. Let's look for the link. Oh, there. There is a link right here that says link rel OData service, title, blah, and then the href to the service. And there is a second one that talks about a feed. So the idea is you can have one or more feed links that give you the data that you're actually looking at. If you're, like, for example, browsing a product catalog and you have subsetted the products, that feed will probably include all the queries. So you can get the same data you're looking at as a data feed. And you can, for example, load it into Excel and use a pivot table to make decisions. The link to the service actually gives you an entry point to the root of the service, so you can link to all of the sets and all that. So this aids with discoverability of the service. You can imagine over time browser applications leveraging this, and we have some today. They don't parse these things yet, but we're seeing browser applications popping all the time, and some we have built as examples, and some are just being built out there. Let me show you a quick one that is hosted in silverlight.net/OData Explorer, and this is you can actually hit the same site. This is an example that is in the OData SDK. I'll talk about this a second ago. A few folks in the team have been hacking this around. Folks like Fanny will be very happy to see this up on stage. And let me just cancel this. And so I can hit, for example, OGDI or the city of Edmonton, and then sort of hit bus stops and sort of browse the data set. And in this case, I'm hitting some web service with data from another web service with a UI and just bringing it all together and looking at it in the client. And I can see where the bus stop is and what times and so on. And of course, I can build queries, and I can actually install it locally in case I want to sort of browse other data sets from my local box. Just like we have this in Silverlight, there is, for example, the LinkPad folks enabled this in LinkPad. So you can, for those of you familiar with it, there is a tool called LinkPad that allows you to write link queries against various data sources. It's OData enabled, so you can actually point it to any OData source out there and write link queries right there dynamically and explore what's in there. So there's a bunch of producers and consumers for OData already out there. There is a list of this in odata.org where you can go browse the lists. And for those that are public, you can actually take a peek, see what they look like, play with them in Visual Studio and such. And so with this, what I want to do is have a call to action. Think about, if you produce data and have interesting data sets, think about them. Think about the ones that will be useful for other people within your organization or across the web, and think about sharing them using OData. We have SDKs for a number of technologies. If you're in .NET, sharing OData with .NET is piece of cake, and there is a session later today to talk about this. And if you have tools that can do cool stuff with data, from things like Power Pivot to end-user experiences or whatever, think about teaching those tools OData. You'll have instant increased reach, because now all of these data sources will be immediately available to you. And we also have toolkits for everything from Objective-C to JavaScript to .NET to make it easier to go interact with these services. And if you want to get started with this, odata.org is the place to go. There is a bunch of content there. The entire protocol is carefully documented in painful amount of detail. We also have examples, and there is downloads for SDKs for a number of platforms. So again, odata.org is the place to go. There is some contact information here in case you want to follow up with something. I'll be hanging out at MIX the rest of the conference, so definitely come talk to me. And there is a bunch of data sources out there. So whoever comes with a mashup of any quality that uses a data feed gets an OData shirt. So just come to any of the team members with your quick hack for a mashup, and you get a shirt. Same thing for questions for now. And with that, we're doing a thing on MSDN radio. People are experimenting with this thing. So on Monday, if you don't get to ask a question here or you're watching this online, on Monday we'll be live there answering questions as well. With that, I want to thank you very much for sticking till the end, and I'll take any questions if you. Thank you.